The sound of a dying economy is not a crash, it is a silence. If you stood on the docks of Cotonou in early 2023, you would have been deafened by the roar of commerce, the screech of metal cables, the shouting of stevedores, the relentless rumble of heavy diesel engines. It was a symphony of chaos and profit. Thousands of trucks lined up bumper to bumper, stretching back for kilometers, all waiting to load cargo destined for the north. But if you stand there today, the soundtrack has changed. The cranes are still standing, but they are not moving. They look like skeletal fingers pointing at an empty sky. The warehouses are locked. The parking lots, once overflowing with vehicles bound for Niamey, are gathering dust. The only sound you hear is the wind whistling through the gaps in the fence and the quiet murmurs of unemployed dock workers wondering where their next meal will come from. This silence is not an accident. It is the direct result of a political calculation that went horribly wrong. For decades, the Republic of Benin served a singular, vital function in West Africa. It was the lung of the Sahel. Its geography was its greatest asset. It sat directly south of Niger, a landlocked nation of 26 million people hungry for imports. The relationship was symbiotic. Niger needed the sea and Benin needed the transit fees. It was a marriage of convenience that generated billions of CFA francs for the Beninese treasury. But in July 2023, when the military took power in Niger, the leadership in Benin decided to weaponize this geography. Under pressure from ECOWAS and heavily influenced by the diplomatic directives coming from Paris and Abuja, the government of Benin slammed the door shut. They erected concrete barriers at the Malanville border crossing. They froze assets. They stopped the flow of medicine and food. The logic in the presidential palace in Cotonou was cold and precise. If we cut off their supply line, the military government in Niamey will collapse in weeks. The people will starve, they will riot, and the old order will be restored. They treated their neighbor not as a partner, but as a hostage. They believed that Niger had no choice. They believed that a landlocked country is helpless against a coastal power. They were wrong. They forgot that a cornered nation does not surrender. It improvises. While Benin waited for Niger to beg for air, Niger simply turned its head and breathed through a different tube. They looked west to Togo. They looked east to Chad. They mobilized their population to endure the hardship. And so, the weeks turned into months. The collapse that Benin predicted for Niger never happened. Instead, the suffocation began to happen in reverse. It was not the landlocked country that started to die, it was the coastal gateway. If you believe that betraying a neighbor is the quickest way to bankrupt a nation, tap the like button, and let's count the cost of the blockade. The tragedy of this situation is that it was entirely avoidable. Geography dictates that Benin and Niger should be brothers. They share a history, a culture, and a river, but politics turned them into strangers. By acting as the enforcer for a regional bloc that had lost its legitimacy, Benin sacrificed its own national interest. They placed the demands of foreign powers above the economic reality of their own people. Now, as the dust settles, the magnitude of the error is becoming clear. The logistics companies in Cotonou are filing for bankruptcy. The customs officials are staring at blank ledgers. The tea sellers and mechanics who service the truck drivers have packed up their stalls. They thought they were imposing a siege on a military junta. In reality, they were imposing a recession on themselves. But the emptiness of the port is just the visual symptom of a much deeper disease. To understand the true scale of this disaster, we have to look away from the ships and look at the balance sheets. We have to analyze the hard data of an economy that cut off its own right arm to spite its face. To understand the suicide of a port, you must understand the mathematics of the corridor. For a long time, the relationship between a coastal nation and a landlocked nation was viewed through a colonial lens. The coast was seen as the master and the hinterland as the servant. The coast held the keys to the world and the hinterland had to pay for permission to pass. This arrogance blinded the strategists in Cotonou. They forgot a fundamental rule of logistics. A port without customers is just a concrete slab in the ocean. Let us look at the numbers. They are brutal in their simplicity. Before the crisis, nearly 70 to 80% of the volume of goods passing through the autonomous Port of Cotonou was not destined for Benin. It was transit cargo. It was rice for Niamey. It was machinery for the uranium mines in Arlit. It was consumer goods for the markets of Maradi. The Benin economy was structurally addicted to this flow. The fees charged on these trucks, the customs duties levied on these containers, and the taxes collected from the transport sector formed a massive pillar of the national budget. It was easy money. It was geography paying a dividend. When the government of Patrice Talon enforced the ECOWAS sanctions, they effectively took a knife and severed this artery. The immediate impact was catastrophic. Almost overnight, customs revenue at the port collapsed. Estimates suggest a drop of nearly 40% in the first few months, but statistics on a spreadsheet do not bleed. To see the real wound, you had to go to the markets. The northern regions of Benin, which share deep cultural and economic ties with Niger, were hit the hardest. The cross-border trade that sustained thousands of families evaporated. The price of fuel, often smuggled cheaply from Nigeria via Niger, skyrocketed. The price of basic foodstuffs, which flowed south from the Sahel, doubled. The population of Benin found themselves paying the price for a diplomatic war they did not choose. They were being punished by their own government's compliance with foreign directives. This is what we call a self-inflicted wound. Usually sanctions are designed to hurt the enemy. In this case, the sanctions hurt the enforcer more than the target. Niger, hardened by years of conflict and accustomed to austerity, tightened its belt and found alternative routes. They paid a premium to use the ports in Togo, but they survived. Benin, however, had no alternative. You cannot move a port. You cannot pick up Cotonou and put it somewhere else. When the customer leaves, the shop closes. The tragedy is that this was not a temporary disruption. In logistics, reliability is everything. Once a trader changes their route, builds new relationships with customs agents in Lomé, and signs new contracts with trucking companies in Togo, they do not switch back easily. The trust is broken. The habit is changed. By trying to strangle Niger, Benin inadvertently accelerated the rise of its rival, Togo. They handed market share to Lomé on a silver platter. If this disaster serves as a lesson for the future of African unity, write lesson learned in the comments, and we move to the pipeline. The government in Cotonou eventually realized the gravity of their miscalculation. As the months dragged on and the port revenues continued to flatline, the rhetoric began to soften. They started to talk about brotherhood. They started to hint that the border could be reopened for humanitarian reasons. But by then, the dynamic had shifted. The military government in Niamey was no longer interested in the old arrangement. They saw Benin not just as an unreliable partner, but as a security threat. They accused Benin of hosting foreign military bases and training terrorists to destabilize Niger. Whether these accusations were fully substantiated or not, they became the basis for a total freeze in relations. So, when Benin finally announced that they were lifting the sanctions, they expected gratitude. They expected the trucks to start rolling again. Instead, they were met with concrete blocks on the Nigerian side of the bridge. Niger refused to open the gate. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. Benin had played its hand, and it had lost. But the port was only the first casualty. The port deals in imports, containers coming in. That is painful to lose. But there was another project, a much larger gamble, that dealt in exports. It was a project that promised to transform Benin into a major energy hub. A steel serpent burying itself under the sand, carrying the black blood of the Sahel to the sea. This pipeline was supposed to be the future. It was supposed to generate transit fees that would make the port losses look like pocket change. But in the high-stakes game of geopolitical poker, Benin tried to use this pipeline as a bargaining chip. They threatened to turn off the tap, and in doing so, they turned a billion-dollar asset into the world's most expensive empty tube. The project was hailed as a marvel of engineering. Stretching nearly 2,000 kilometers from the Agadem Rift Basin in eastern Niger to the Semei terminal on the Beninese coast, it is the longest cross-border crude oil pipeline in Africa. For Benin, this was the golden ticket. It was not just a pipe, it was a guaranteed revenue stream. Under the transit agreement, Benin was set to earn millions of dollars annually just for letting the oil flow through its territory. It was passive income on a national scale. It was supposed to diversify their economy away from the volatile port revenues. But in mid-2024, as the diplomatic standoff hardened, the leadership in Cotonou made a fatal strategic error. They looked at the valve on their coast, and they saw a weapon. They reasoned that Niger, desperate for cash to pay its civil servants and fund its military, would do anything to get that oil to market. They believed that if they threatened to block the exports, the military government in Niamey would be forced to open the border and normalize relations on Benin's terms. It was a classic chokehold strategy. President Patrice Talon publicly stated that the pipeline and the border were linked. He effectively said, "If you do not open the bridge for our trucks, we will not open the tap for your oil." This was the gamble. Benin bet that Niger's need for money was greater than its pride. They lost that bet. The response from Niamey was immediate and furious. General Tiani did not send diplomats to beg. He sent a message that shocked the region. He accused Benin of acting as a proxy for foreign powers, specifically France, and declared that the safety of Niger's resources could not be guaranteed on Beninese soil. Instead of capitulating, Niger ordered the flow to stop. They turned off the pumps. The Niger-Benin Pipeline, a multi-billion-dollar investment funded largely by the Chinese state oil company CNPC, suddenly went quiet. The oil that was supposed to be filling tankers at the Semei terminal remained trapped in the desert. This move was a geopolitical earthquake. It proved that the alliance of Sahel states was willing to suffer economic pain rather than submit to political blackmail. It demonstrated a level of resolve that the coastal elites had completely underestimated. The Chinese partners were furious. They had built the infrastructure, they had drilled the wells, and now their investment was being held hostage by a border dispute they wanted no part of. Pressure mounted on Benin to back down. Beijing does not like it when its assets are used as pawns in a local feud, but the damage was already done. Benin had proven itself to be an unreliable transit partner. In the energy world, reliability is everything. If a country is willing to turn off a pipeline to score political points, no investor will trust them with a long-term contract again. If you want to see the real map of energy warfare, consider joining as a member. We track the oil, not the speeches. The consequences for Benin's budget were dire. The transit fees they were counting on to plug the hole left by the port crisis never materialized. They were left with a hollow victory. They had successfully blocked Niger's oil, but they had also blocked their own income. Meanwhile, Niger began to look for alternatives. They dusted off old plans. They started talks with Chad and Cameroon to route their oil through the existing Chad-Cameroon pipeline. It would be expensive. It would take years to build the connecting infrastructure. But the message was clear. We will go the long way around if it means avoiding a traitor. This is the price of weaponizing infrastructure. You might hurt your enemy in the short term, but you destroy your own reputation forever. As the standoff continued, the reality on the ground became even grimmer. While the politicians argued over valves and treaties, the physical border became a graveyard of commerce. We must shift our focus from the high-level oil dispute to the ground-level catastrophe. We must look at the place where the two countries meet. We must travel to the border town of Malanville. Malanville was once a bustling hub of trade. It was a chaotic, vibrant marketplace where the CFA franc changed hands faster than anywhere else in the region. It was the gateway. Today, it is a parking lot of despair. The images coming out of Malanville are haunting. They show a scene that looks like the aftermath of an apocalypse. Thousands of heavy-duty trucks parked in lines that stretch to the horizon. They are not moving. They have not moved for months. The bridge that spans the Niger River at Malanville was built to connect two nations. It is a symbol of integration. But today, it stands as a monument to separation. If you walk through the parking lots on the Beninese side of the border, the first thing that hits you is not the sight, but the smell. It is the sweet, sickly scent of decay. Thousands of tons of onions, tomatoes, and perishable goods harvested months ago in the Sahel have turned into compost inside the sweltering steel containers. These are the ghost trucks of the Malanville border. The drivers who pilot these vehicles are not soldiers. They are not politicians. They are ordinary working men. Many of them are Beninese citizens. They voted for the government that trapped them here. For nearly a year and a half, they have lived under the axles of their trucks. They cook on small fires by the roadside. They sleep on hammocks strung between the mirrors. They watch their livelihoods evaporate in the heat. This is the human face of the blockade. While the diplomats in Cotonou and Abuja were issuing statements about restoring constitutional order, these men were losing everything. The transport companies that own these fleets are defaulting on their loans. The banks in Benin are staring at a mountain of bad debt. The entire ecosystem of the border, the women selling water, the mechanics fixing tires, the money changers has collapsed. It is a ghost town. The irony is cruel. Benin closed the border to suffocate Niger, but Niger found a way to breathe. The real victim of the suffocation was the northern economy of Benin itself. The farmers in the north, who relied on selling their grain to Niger, have no market. The cotton growers, who relied on the port to export their white gold, found their route blocked by the congestion and the chaos. Meanwhile, just a few hundred kilometers to the west, the contrast could not be more stark. The border crossing at Sinkasay between Togo and Burkina Faso is alive. It is electric. The lights burn all night. The customs officials are overwhelmed with the volume of traffic that used to flow through Benin. By trying to punish its neighbor, Benin effectively gifted its entire logistics industry to its rival. Togo did not have to steal the business. Benin handed it over. Where are you watching from? City and country. From Burkina Rising, may you always choose loyalty over leverage, and we promise to reveal the fallout. The anger in Malanville is palpable. The drivers feel betrayed. They feel that their president sacrificed them for a foreign agenda. They see the French frigates docked in Cotonou, and they see the French flags flying at the embassy, and they ask a simple question. Did France pay for my rotting onions? Did ECOWAS pay for my children's school fees? The answer, of course, is no. This internal pressure became a boiling pot. The protests started. The unions threatened to strike. The opposition politicians began to use the ghost trucks as a weapon against the ruling party. The narrative shifted. It was no longer about saving democracy in Niger. It was about saving the economy of Benin. Under this immense pressure, the government of Benin finally blinked. In late 2024, the rhetoric changed. The hardline stance evaporated. President Talon announced that the sanctions would be lifted. He declared that Benin was ready to resume trade. He sent envoys to the border to unlock the gates. It was a humiliating U-turn. After months of tough talk, after months of strangling the north, Benin was finally admitting defeat. They opened the barriers. The customs officers returned to their posts. The drivers started their engines, hoping to finally cross the bridge. But then, something unexpected happened. The trucks drove to the middle of the bridge, and they stopped. On the other side, the heavy concrete blocks of the Nigerian army were still in place. The soldiers of the National Guard stood with their arms crossed. They did not move. Benin had opened the door, but Niger refused to walk through it. The image of the Beninese border guards waving trucks forward, only to see them stopped by Nigerian concrete a few meters away, is the defining image of this crisis. It represents a fundamental shift in the psychology of the Sahel. For decades, the coastal nations believed they held all the power. They believed that the landlocked countries needed them to survive. But the alliance of Sahel states has proven that dignity is a stronger motivator than hunger. Niger's refusal to reopen the border was not just an act of spite, it was a cold calculation of national security. General Tiani and the leadership in Niamey stated clearly that they could not trust a neighbor who had so easily turned into a jailer. They cited intelligence reports alleging that foreign bases were being established in northern Benin, bases designed to destabilize the AES. Whether these allegations are fully proven or not is almost irrelevant. The perception is the reality. The trust is gone. And in geopolitics, trust is a currency. Once you debase it, you cannot simply print more. The damage to the Benin economy is not cyclical, it is structural. By the time Cotonou tried to fix the mistake, the damage was already permanent. The traders had moved, the contracts were rewritten, the flow of goods had carved a new path through the mountains of Togo. History teaches us that trade routes are like rivers. Once they change course, it takes a massive effort to force them back into the old channel. Benin has lost its status as the default gateway. It is now just another option, and a risky one at that. The Niger-Benin Pipeline remains dry, a silent steel monument to the failure of coercive diplomacy. It serves as a stark warning to any nation that attempts to weaponize its infrastructure against a sovereign state. The oil will find another way to the sea, or it will stay in the ground. But it will not flow through the hands of those who try to use it as a noose. This crisis has exposed the fragility of the old neo-colonial model. It showed that when a country like Benin acts as a proxy for external interests, prioritizing the demands of Paris or Abuja over the needs of its own neighbors, the result is national suicide. The Benin economy is the casualty of a war it did not need to fight. The lesson for the rest of West Africa is clear. You cannot build your prosperity on the suffocation of your brothers. The era of the proxy state is ending. The era of the partner state must begin. We are witnessing the redrawing of the map. It is a map where alliances are based on mutual respect, not historical obligation. It is a map where a closed border is a badge of honor, and an open hand is reserved only for those who have proven their loyalty. Benin wanted to teach Niger a lesson about geography. Instead, Niger taught Benin a lesson about sovereignty. If you stand for sovereignty at any cost, subscribe and share this warning with the world. We build bridges for friends and walls for traitors. That's Burkina rising. The cranes in Cotonou may eventually move again. The trucks may one day cross the bridge at Malanville, but the relationship will never be the same. The innocence is lost. The Sahel has learned that the only route it can truly rely on is the one it builds, defends, and controls itself. The door is closed, and the key has been thrown into the Niger River.